Okay, good morning. Beis. We finished the paragraph on page 1167. And to sum up, explaining in different states where the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra reflect or manifest. So in the beginning of this discourse, this Maimer, the Lekachtam Lechem, which we're now concluding, Maimer number 139, explain these two perspectives, Das Elyon and Das Tachten. So Atzilus in general, in the beginning of the Maimer began that Atzilus in general is Das Elyon. Meaning the Ayin of the Yesha Amiti, that it sees things from the perspective of godliness, of God. Then he went on pretty much right in page 1162, that was the bottom of 1161. So I was saying that in Atzilus itself, you have both perspectives. Explained at length that there's the two sides to Atzilus, one that it's divine, but it's a divine structure, like the faculties of the soul. So it's an Olam Atzilus. Okay. After a long discussion about that, he then went and said at the bottom of page 166, he said, so in Atzilus itself you have both levels of Ayin, and then he says, based on the Biur Azeir, Pasha Vayetze, bottom of 1166, top of 1167, that it's not just Atzilus in general, the mamutza of these two, but specifically in Chochmah. In Chochmah itself, you have these two levels, the inner dimension of Chochmah, the outer dimension of Chochmah, and went on to explain that Chochmah has both sides as well to it. On one hand, it's a Reishis HaGilui, it's the beginning of Gilui. Yes, indeed, it's a Gilui La'atzmei, to yourself, not to another. So it's stimus, but it's not completely concealed, as in Atzilus. On the other hand, it is in a state that he says is still radiates the Ayin, Chachma Ma'ayin Temotza, the Ayin, the Bittel. So go back and forth between it being somebody calls Ayin, he calls it Ksas, Yesh Ksas. Like he called it the colorless color of a government, he calls the color that has no color, Gavin Pashut, like water. That's a colorless color. So something is there, but it doesn't yet have the shape and form of a true full-blown gili. Okay. You also compared it to Bereshis Nami Maimeru. That's the level of Chachma. So it has both elements, Chitzenius and Primius. And he compared these two to Teira. The Teira is also Mamutza. We find in Teira, Eita Er Kisalmo, that God wrapped himself in Er like a garment. So there's two levels, Er and Salma, Chitzenius Teira and Primius Teira. Chitzenius Teira has measure. And I looked up in Erevin what he says there. Basically, he says exactly that. There he talks about that he brings the Chava Mitzvah Sechem Eid. He says the Lashon there is Chol Tichlo Yesh Kates. To every goal, to every purpose, there is a limit. Yesh Kates, there's some measure. The Chava Mitzvah Sechem Eid. Your mitzvahs are very expansive. So he goes on to say how expansive. So he says it doesn't spell it out until one of the Tanoim does spell it out, and that's where he brings the expression there. He says, Nimtza, that the Elam is one part of 3,200 of the Torah. I apologize. Sorry. So he says there's measurements. He gives measurements to the Torah, and says Torah has parameters. And he asks, what are the parameters? So he brings there this expression that the Torah is from different sources. That Torah is a certain measure. And based on that, the world is one, as he says, 1/3200 parts, 1/3200, 1/3200th of the Torah. Well, you see from that, the Torah has some parameters, because you wouldn't say a measure like that. And also it shows that Torah relates to existence, to the world. It's somewhat similar to what I said about Payim Shana Kodma Torah Le'elam. It's like a Kodma Le'elam, it's greater and higher than the world, but it's still a Payim Shana. You still give it a limit, 2,000, 2 levels, not 20, not infinite. That's what he says in Erevin. But Primis HaTorah, Ein B'chinas Midav Agbola. Primis HaTorah, which does not relate to the existence. It's not the Torah speaking about the world. When you learn Nigla Chassidus HaTorah, you're learning about Torah as it addresses, let's say, Hilchas Erevin. Hilchas Erevin is all about measurements. The same thing with Shabbos, Lametes Malachas. Every halacha in Torah has structure. A Kazayis is not Kebeya, Pesach is not Shavuos, Kashrus is not Hilchas Yom Tov, etc. And each halacha has its structure. When you're learning Primis HaTorah, you're learning about godliness. And godliness is unlimited, so therefore the Torah about godliness is also unlimited. So he compares this to the 2 levels in Chochmah. So the Chochmah as it relates to Chochmas HaNigla, HaChatzenis HaTorah, is a Chochmah that's more like the Ayin of the Yesha HaNivra, and the Chochmah that relates to Primis HaTorah is the Chochmah of the Ayin of the Yesha HaMiti, the Ma'alim Ha'elam. And then finally, the last statement in the last 3 lines on the paragraph on page 1167, he says another way of placing it is Chochmei Law is the first level in Atzilus is the Ayin of Yesh Amiti Das Alien, and Chochmei Tata, which is Chochmah of Malchus, connected to creation, the Chochmah within creation, that is the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. That's what he says. You may recall that this is similar to what he spoke in Tzadik Dalad when he spoke the difference between the two. He said, Chochmas HaMaisa, the Chochma of craftsmanship. There's a Chochma in the design of existence. And there's the Chochmas HaNefesh, understanding the personality of the individual, not the craft, not around the function or the creation of something, but the individual, the personality of the individual is creating it. So he spoke about that there. As a matter of fact, I want to just see one thing from Sadi Dalit. 1 second. Because I think he also brought, if I recall correctly, he also brought in Torah levels like this. Do any of you remember that? What did he say? 1 second, let me just see something. I took the wrong safe, sorry. Remember, he spoke about, I remember in Torah, he spoke 2 things, very practical. Oh, Mishnah and Gemara. Remember, he took Torah Shebiksav, then Mishnah, and then Gemara. For some reason, it's ringing, maybe it's not connected. I want to just see if it is. Where was that?
Was that
Okay, I'm looking at page 164 and 165, that's where he talks about it. The Kudikav Shetach, the three levels. So he said there, no, those were the three levels of Bittel, I think. Now, there he was talking three levels of Bittel in the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. So no, it's not related directly. Let's take that back. Okay. What I would like to do is, before we finish this mimer, I have here the mimer Bayom HaShemini Atzeres Tavshin Tezvav. You may recall we learned part of it because there the Rebbe spelled out the four levels of Bittel of the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. But there he continued on. Tzadik Dalet stopped after the third level of Bittel. We never learned the fourth level, and we definitely didn't go to Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra. Now we have both. So I wanted to just point out, and maybe just read inside. If you have the mimer, great. If not, it is. I believe we posted it up on ayinbeis.com. If it's there, great. If not, I'll just read, because might as well, since we did this already, there is something from the Rebbe here. So after the three levels, the four levels of Bittel of Ayin, so I'm looking at the mimer, page 15, the Bayom HaShemini Atzeres Tavshin Tezvav. So, okay, so after he finishes saying that the fourth level is the way the moir, the way the source looks at oir, and oir assumes that property as well. Then he goes on to speak about the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra, and there he says explicitly that Oyer is the Ayin of the Yesh Hamiti, and Kalim, I'm reading inside, he says like this, Mekolza, move on, middle of the page 15, it's chapter 3, the end of chapter 3 of the Mimer of the Rebbe. He says, Mekolza, move on. I'm reading inside. From all this we understand, Sha'er Shu Dovik B'mkere. Remember the word is Dovik B'mkere. It's attached to its source. One minute. It's so all this is about the oyer, due to the fact that it's attached to the source of b'chinas ha'ayin shel yesh amiti, shu ayin ve'efes mamish. Mashenken ha'kelim, by contrast, the kelim she'efen ha'savusam hu b'dveikus, built in the keres dafke, the way they are crafted, the way they are created, is dafke specific in a way that they're not in the obvious state of attachment to the source. Remember, the kelim focus on the function. And the kelim are from ha'ara da'ara, like we learned as well, a reflection of a reflection. Ha'ara da'ara ha'ara nivdelis kiyadua. It's a separate reflection. It's like a leap away. That's why the containers are the ayin of the yesh hanivra. She'enam ayin ve'efes be'emes. They're not complete, utter nullification. V'nikroim b'shem ayin rak lefi she'enam mesug mitzir shel hanivra. Ve'ayin she'enam musag. And the reason they're called ayin, not because they're completely nullified, is because they're not from the same mesug, the same material, so to speak, that the yesh, the creation, is made of. And the ayin she'enam musag. And it's not comprehensible. That's what he says there. Then the Rebbe continues. This is very parallels to what we're learning now. That's why I'm reading it. So now he says, V'hinei Beis deis elu. Now these two perspectives, the das elyon v'das tachten k'moshu be'elamis, the way it's in existence in the world. This in general is the difference between Atzilus and Biyah. Atzilus is just like the first interpretation in this mimer. That Atzilus is the Ayin of Yesh Amiti. And Ayin of Yesh Hanivra is Biyah. Why? Because Elam Atzilus is completely divine, Elikus Mamish. And in Atzilus radiates the light the way it's attached to its source. And that's when Atzilus, you and your energies are one, your light is one, and you are one with Kalim. From this is understood that an Atzilus radiates the state of utter Ayin ve'efes, utter bittul, nullification. V'hainu, the kivish abchinas iyu nirgish gam b'chayuhi. This means because the level of iyu, you, the godliness that's higher than Atzilus, is nirgish, is felt, also in chayuhi, v'afilu gam b'gamui, and afilu, and even in the kalim. L'chein hine klolos Atzilus gam ha-kalim. That's why general Atzilus, also the containers, hein bebitl b'mitzias, are in a state of utter bitl, utter sublimation or utter nullification. They don't have any identity of their own. Mashenkim b'biyad, the lav ihu v'chayu echad, lav ihu v'gamu echad, in biyah, where you don't say you and your chayu are one, you and your kalim and garmui are one. Ein behem abitl b'mitzias. They already have some identity. They're not completely nullified. V'hainu da'af shegam behem yesh, even though yesh is a bittul, even though in biyah they have some measure of bittul, they're not rogue, they're not like outside of Elikus, they're bottle. Harizeraka bittul de das tachten. It's the bittul of das tachten. In other words, it's a bittul to godliness, but godliness that recognizes there's an existence, and the existence recognizes there's a source. Not that it doesn't exist, the only thing is that there's a source. Like it is in the Ayin of Yesh Amiti, Das Elyon. And this is due to the fact that in Biyah, the creation of Biyah is through concealment and covering. Because Biyah, the creation of Biyah, comes from Malchus, the level of Malchus that conceals and covers up, as we've been learning. So that's the first, how he explains Atzilus, therefore, is Das Elyon. Ayin of Yesh Amiti, Biyah is Das Tachten, Ayin of Yesh Hanivra. Then the Rebbe continues. Same parallels, literally how it goes in Ayin Beis here. He says, V'oid zois, moreover, shebeis deyas elu yeshnam gam b'Atzilus gufim. These both perspectives are in Atzilus itself. So he's not said anything here really that I found to be a fundamental chiddush that's not an Ayin Beis, maybe about the Kalim a bit, but still we decided, since we've been learning the parallel Maimarim, decided let's read this a little more. It's not much. It's only one more paragraph, so I'm going to just finish it. I'll do it quickly here. So the both days now are in Atzilus itself. Like the Maimer B'Lekachtam, this Maimer we're just finishing to learn, much finished learning, is also talks in Atzilus itself. Shari afsha Atzilus u'maloshen etzlei v'samuch. So he adds that. Doesn't say that in Ayin Beis. That even though Atzilus, the word Atzilus also has a meaning, etzlei v'samuch. The Pardes Ramak says it means etzlei. It's near him. Etzlei, it's by him and near him. He says something is etzel. Atzilus is etzel, means it's nearby. So it's nearby. So it's etzlei, by him, the samuch, and close to him. That means Atzilus is Elikus. B'kol mokrim nikra gamhu b'shem elam. Nevertheless, Atzilus is also called a world. Exactly like he said on page 1162. Called an elam. The elam, yeah. Shahari b'chib dal elam esabiyah. Nichel gam elam Atzilus. Because in the four worlds of Atzilus, Bri, Yetzir, Asiyah, we say four worlds. So for that, you see that Atzilus is also considered a world. The Elam, Umaloshin, Helam, Behester. And the word Elam, very word Elam, world, means, it's from the expression Helam, Behester. That's why it's called Elam. It's a concealer and a cover. So that's why in Atzilus, because the other side now, when you break it down and dissect and focus on the anatomy, so to speak, of Atzilus, you find in Atzilus has also the element of an elam, and therefore you have there the ayin of the yesh hanivra, because it's already an elam, and das tachten, the perspective from below. By inyan bezeh.
Only by the kelim.
That's what you're saying. I told you 10 times, and Ayin Beis, he doesn't say that. Where are you getting that from? He doesn't say anywhere that the kelim. First he says all of Atzilus is das elyon. Then he says in Atzilus itself, you have das elyon and das tachten. And he calls Esa Spheris, Esa Tikunin, which is Levushim, a Levush ha'atzmi. He doesn't say anywhere that the 10 spheres is the Eris is das elyon and the kelim are das tachten. If you find it, Adarabah, show it to me.
He did say that the part of the Eris is Mibchenas Adveikus, and then there is another
say
part
that this is das elyon and this is das tachten. He did not say it. He said it about Chochmeh. He said 2 levels, Chochmeh la, Chochmeh tata in Atzilus. He doesn't say it in anywhere. This is I'm not sure where you're getting it from.
Okay, but did he say that everything in Atzilus, like the Rabbi is saying in this Maimer, is das tachten in Ayin Beis?
He's going to say that in the next Maimer. In the next Maimer, he's going to say that. Not yet. Right now, it's either all das elyon and biyaz das tachten, or in Atzilus itself, you have the spheres, as they're called, tikunin, levushim, is das tachten, and as they're called spheres, das elyon. And he says about the Eris and the kelim together. Now, in Inyan, of course you could say that, but he doesn't say it explicitly in the Maimor. In the Rebbe's Maimor, he says it, but not in the Ayin Beis. But upon him, now he's saying, in Atzilus you have both. Because the whole Elam Atzilus, not just the Kelim, the Elam Atzilus has a helm, therefore das tav, Inyan bezeh. Continuing on, the Inyan of this is the Hine. Because now, Elam Atzilus shumamutza ben lamaylam Atzilus ubein biyah. Atzilus is an interface between that which is higher than Atzilus and biyah. Mamish, what we said, we learned yesterday, the bottom of page 1166. That every interface has a part of each level. The same as with Atzilus. She has me'ein shalamaylam Atzilus. It has something that's me'ein, that's higher than Atzilus. U'me'ein shal biyah, and something that is similar to biyah. U'lechein, and therefore bechinas Atzilus sheba Atzilus. Dahainu bechinas chachma d'Atzilus. Atzilus within Atzilus, which is chachma within Atzilus, who are ayin shal yesh amiti, is the ayin of the yesh amiti. Behind the lefisha sfiras hachachma, he eres bli kelim. So here the Rebbe does connect it with that, because chachma is eres without kelim. Aval b'chinas bina zo malchus, bina zo malchus shem b'chinas biyasha b'atzilus. They're the 3 levels of bri yitzira. Remember we spoke. There's Atzilus within Atzilus. That's chachma. Bria shabatzilus is bina. Yitzira in Atzilus is zo. And Asiya Shabbatzilus is Malchus. Einu b'chinas ayin ve'efes be'emes ve'em raka ayin shel yesh hanivra. They're the ayin of the yesh hanivra. So now you see in Atzilus both levels. He's calling it Chachma, and the levels below Chachma. Ulamayli Yeser, the Rebbe goes now higher. Hine Beis Deis Elohim l'maylam Atzilus v'Atzilus. Now he says these 2 days. This is already the next mimer in Ayin Beis. I think I should stop here because now he's going to the next level, which is going to be the next mimer. But upon him, then he's going to say that higher than Atzilus is Das Elyon, and Atzilus is Das Tachten. So you're going to find these levels all over Ishtalshalos, all depending relative to what your level you're discussing. I will stop here because this is as much as we learned in Ayin Beis. We'll run the rest after we learn it in Ayin Beis, and I'll come back here and we'll conclude it how the Rebbe explains it, because there's still more levels than what we're discussing. We're going to be still discussing how Atzilus is das tachten. Then he's going to go higher. That is the Primis Akav, and Chetzenius Akav is going to be das Ayin and das tachten on higher levels. But we already learned, if you remember, as I said, we can place das Ayin and das tachten, Ayin of Yesh Hamiti, Ayin Yesh Nivra, already 3 levels earlier, before the Tzimtzum, Save of Kalalman, and Mamala Kalalman. Pnimius Akav and Chetzenius Akav. He already said that earlier in Ayin Beis. Now he's explaining it on lower levels in Atzilus and beyond, and within Atzilus itself, like we just discussed. Okay, so that's it. That's it with the Rebbe's Maimer.
When we are saying Neshama de Atzilus, that means stops by Atzilus, not reaching Lemailom Atzilus?
I didn't understand the question.
When we are saying Neshama de Atzilus, person that is having Neshama de Atzilus, that means not reaching higher than Atzilus, or it's a concept?
This is completely not discussed in this Maimer here. I'm not even... It's a completely different discussion. He doesn't speak about...
I know, but could you say one line about this?
There's nothing to say. What am I supposed to say to you? I mean, this is a big discussion. Atzilus is not good enough for you? I mean...
Look in Torah from this week, the Maimer Misom Pele Odom about Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was Mishmit or Rishona. He was Bechlal a different thing.
As you know, I don't like to, because this Maimer, because these Maimorim are very dense, I don't like to move to other subjects. You're asking me one Masechta from another Masechta now.
Okay.
I'd rather not go there right now. It's really a different discussion.
Rabbi Jacobson, did you just say that Chachma in the Maimer that you were just learning, Chachma doesn't have a Keli? Didn't he say that in a line?
The Rebbe brings that in the line that Chachma is primarily Oyer and not Kelim. Yeah.
But I've always thought that it certainly does have a Keli.
Everything is relative. Higher to compared to higher, it has Keli. There's a Klei Chachma, yes. Everything is relative. Remember, this is not stationary objects. It all talks about what you mean by the word Keli. The Chachma, if you're talking about the structure of Chachma, like we spoke yesterday, there is a Yud, there is some Gilui, that's more connected. There is something that connects to a Keli. If you're talking about Chachma in its purest form, compared to lower levels, it's only a spark. It's primarily Oyer and not Keli. The Rebbe brings it only to show that you have in Atzilus itself levels which are more focused on the Oyer, and that's why in Chachma there's more focus on the Oyer, on the Dveikus. But Chachma also has Keli. The truth is there's levels in Chachma, that's the bottom line, like we said. Inner Chachma, outer Chachma, Primis HaChachma, Chetzenius HaChachma. So Chachma, as it relates to Bina, starts emerging a Keli. But yes, in general, Chachma is sometimes seen as a level of Eres B'lei Kelim, as the Rebbe says. I think they even say in Amokah, let me see. He says here, Chachma without 19. Yeah, he brings Tofresh Ayin Ches, Eratera. But yeah, depending how you're speaking. Like remember, we said, is Chachma Gilui or not? It's a Gilui La'atzmei. So it all comes down relative. We've been talking about this all the time. Machshava, compared to Dibur, seemingly has no Kelim. But compared to higher than Machshava, it begins to have the Asis and Machshava. They're more subtle forms of containers. Remember, there are containers higher than Atzilus. Why don't you ask a better question? Akudim is 10 energies in one container. Nekudim, Toyu, is 10 energies in 10 containers. So how can you say suddenly Atzilus, which is lower than those worlds, has no Kelim? Same thing we talked about Ak. Some places it says Ak has no Kelim. Some places it says there's Kelim to Ak. The answer is Keli is not a static state. Keli means definition. It means structure. In general, Tzimtzum Nikra Kelim, the Alter Rebbe says. As soon as there's a Tzimtzum addition, it's already the beginnings of some form of structure. Before the Tzimtzum, you can't talk about Kelim. But after the Tzimtzum, so the real truth is, what does Keli mean? As I've said many times, a Keli is not a cup. Either you have a cup or you don't have a cup. In every level, there's a form of a dakas dika, a subtle form of keli that gives it some type of substance, and it all comes down to how low we go. And in Bri Yitzir Asiyah, we have physical kelim. No, it's spiritual kelim. It's all relative. In this physical world, we have a Ayin and a Keli, a physical Keli, a body, or any physical entity is a Keli, a container for the divine energy within it. Okay.
In page 1162, he's discussing the thing, and he said, "Ubchinas hachochma, ubchinas atzilus, shebatzilus shelamaylo me'akelim."
Okay, so it's the same words. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, remember he said Atzilus Sheba Atzilus. He said L'mayla Mekelim. Great. So then the Rebbe's taking it straight from Ayin Beis. So it's not. I thought those words were not there. What? The top of 1162.
In the middle of 1162, he's discussing all the dargers in Atzilus. There's Bri Yitzir Asio, and Chochma is Atzilus Sheba Atzilus. Barichus is explaining it.
Yeah, we learned this. Yeah. Let me see.
Saying it about 12 lines from the bottom.
Okay, good.
Then he's dividing from Pnimius HaChochma, Chesenes HaChochma, that this is Pnimius HaChochma. So,
yeah, we discussed it. Atzilus, the pratis, yeah. Right. Yeah, that's why it's the Kavona Nira Shabchin's Pnimis HaChochma. Yeah, clearly says.
I don't see where it says Bli Kalim there. Rabbi Taktal, which line does it say Bli Kalim in Samach, on page Samach Gimel?
It's in no, not Samach Gimel. Kuf Samach Beis.
1162. Yeah, very good. It steams perfectly. It's excellent. It steams perfectly. Okay, very good. It steams right. It's very aligned completely to what we've been learning. Yeah, that's what he said, that in Atzilus there's four levels. The Oil L'mayla Mekelim. Yeah. Yeah, works well. Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of levels where the Ayin of the Yesha Nivra starts.
There's a reason for that, as I explained at length. The Rebbe Rashab is providing us with a blueprint for Avodah. He wants us to be able to find in every level the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. As I said, the only way this can really fully be understood is when you apply it to your own life. There's difference, so therefore, there's throughout Ishtalshus, it makes total sense. Depending where you are, there's a level where you connect more to the divine element in it, the dveikus to the source, God's perspective, so to speak. And there's where you connect to godliness as it relates to you. So wouldn't that make sense? We have 8 billion people on this planet. I would say if each one was introspective and doing a soul search, they would find the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of Yesh Nivra in different ways. All of us right here. If we would all figure it out how it's an Ayurveda, no two of us would have exactly the same type of Ayin Yesh Amiti, Ayin Yesh Nivra. It's relative to the state you're in. That's the whole point. This is not physics. This is not chemistry. It's not biology. It's not like, okay, there's an eyeball in your head and ears over here. There's no eyeballs in your chest. There's no brain in your heart. You know, they communicate with each other. But in this physical world, space and time are seen in a very stationary way. One moment is not another moment. One space is not another space. In Ruchnius, it doesn't work that way. In Ruchnius, everything is encompassed in everything. It only comes down to what the emphasis is. So the whole reality, don't apply physical, spatial terms to Ruchnius Dika concepts. Because Ruchnius Dika concept, you could say that there's the Koyach Hariyah within the Koyach Hashmiyah. You could say there's the eyes within the heart, so to speak, because you're not talking about physical locations. You're talking about spiritual states of being. So in a spiritual state of being, you could see, like we say, yesterday's Mamala Kalalman is today, yesterday's Sevav Kalalman is today's Mamala Kalalman, a very simple level. If someone says you're learning Ayin Beis, yeah. You understand it? You say, to some extent, I understand it. But there's a lot of it is over my head. Then someone comes to you a month from now and they say, where do you stay? You say, well, that which was over my head yesterday, now I understand. And now there's new things that are over my head. So someone will say to you, which one is it? You'll say, well, it's not stationary. It's all relative to the level you're at. When I'm in this place where I'm right now, that which I learned yesterday, now I've internalized. That which I don't understand yet is still above me. So the same thing in Aveda, there's levels of b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha. So it all comes down to where you're talking about. There's no black and white. You're never going to have a black and white. You just have to come to peace with that. It's the first thing that you need to learn when you learn Chassidus, that you're not going to have control over it and you're not mastering it because it's not a stationary state. It's all over the place. Everything is everywhere. However, to give us some semblance, some handles, we talk Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah. What does it even mean, Atzilus within Atzilus and Bria within Atzilus? Then we always say Bria is outside of Atzilus. Do you have, for example, the Jupiter within Saturn or the Saturn within Jupiter or Earth within Mars and Mars within Earth? No, it's two distinct planets. They interact. Maybe they influence each other. Fine. The moon and this, but they're all very distinct entities. This is not the way it works in Ruchnius. Everything has within it all the other levels because at the end of the day, there's Hashem Echad, and that Achdus reigns supreme, and yet the Eibishter wanted a structure. That structure is what we're discussing here. In that structure, you're going to find what he says here is just basics. If you really want, there's infinite levels of Ayin of Yesh Amiti and infinite levels of Ayin Yesh Anivra, all depending where you go. I can guarantee you, in Primis HaChachma itself, you can find these two levels. Not just Primis HaChetzenis HaChachma. However, the Rebbe Rashab is giving us the framework, and now we have to figure out where you apply it in each particular situation. You know, for example, Nigla de Torah compared to Chachmas HaElam is called Bli Gvul. Compared to Primis HaTorah, it's called Gvul. So all is relative in that context. Okay.
I don't know why you say though that we can't see that in our lives with the development and the incredible chidush of quantum now. I think can't we say in quantum that you can see the deterministic in the probability and probability within the deterministic, which seems to me is very similar to what you were just saying about the relative relationships.
If you think it's similar, fine. I don't think it's similar, to be honest. Is it have something that tells you that something is in an amorphous, nebulous state which has not been determined yet? Yeah, like we say that a male or female, the Gemara says, is not determined immediately. It happens later. Yes, the idea that something is still in the state of indeterminism or probability. So that sense, yes. But the truth is, even quantum state, first of all, even the state of indeterminism is not quite like Atzilus and Bria and the Ruchnisdika world. It's not spiritual. It's a similarity in physics. In the physical world, you have a state that's not yet been determined. Number two, once it has been determined, we live in a very deterministic universe. Nobody says when you wake up in the morning, even al pi halacha, that maybe the sun is going to rise at a different time than what was scheduled because of quantum. It's fixed, and you can build on it and base on it. You can rely that your house is standing, and you don't every second think to yourself, you know what, maybe quantum is going to take over, and my whole tangible reality is going to suddenly become a quantum indeterministic state. So this is a big dilemma actually in physics. Indeterminism meets determinism, but we also live in a universe which is absolutely deterministic. In the microscopic level, there's indeterminism at work. So is it an example? Yes. But at the same time, this world is quite fixed as well. And that's why we have rules of the laws of nature that base everything. I remember a book that came out, I don't know, around 15 years ago. It said that the computer is the most deterministic technology based on indeterminism, because quantum helped build the microchip, and so on. But at the end of the day, your computer gives you results. You can pretty rest assured that if you press in the calculator 2 + 2, it's always going to come 4. It's not going to be 5 at times. That's so Lifi Erech, yes, and determinism gives us some taste of a state that's we'll say undefined yet, and then it becomes defined. But the bottom line is, in the Ruchnis, the whole thing is, I wouldn't call it quantum. That's not what I said. I didn't say it's quantum. I said it's everywhere is everywhere, which means that the levels we're talking about are levels that God implanted. It all relative, I would say. Relative is a better word than quantum here. Relative meaning, depending. If you're talking from Biyas perspective, so Atzilus is Das Elyon. If you're talking about higher than Atzilus, Atzilus is Das Tacht. Because it all comes down to, and I think with individuals is best, what someone has, for one person, what they understand for another person is above their head. For another person is above their head, the next day that becomes internalized. So I think that would be more of an example in Aveda of how different individuals relate to these perspectives. So generally speaking, you have to look inside your own heart and soul and ask yourself, do you see existence, and from existence you're extrapolating there's a God behind the scenes, which is Das Tachten, or do you see God and you're extrapolating that God created existence and existence is the novelty? Obviously, for most of us, it's number one. And then we come to understand perhaps number two. There are people who come to higher levels of that, and there itself, there's many, many levels. So it all comes down to, in my perspective, the only way to really internalize this is when you personalize it and find, where do you stand? Where do you stand? Now, as I said many times, most of us are not even a Das Tachten. Das Tachten is a great achievement. It means that your existence, you're identifying with the godliness within your existence. Most of us are just wandering around following our yesh and not even aligning it to Das Tachten, let alone to Das Elyon. So we have to be realistic as well when we are journeying, we're taking this journey. And that's why you talked about in davening, where you are at Moeda'ani is different than when you are Shemoneh Esrei. So the more it's personalized, the more this becomes more alive. If not, what you're going to end up having is a mathematical equation, and you're going to be memorizing. Okay, so what do we learn? Das Elyon is where? Is it in Biyah? Is it in Atzilus? Is it in Chochmah? Is it in the Kav? Is it higher than Atzilus? Is it before the Tzimtzum? Is it after the Tzimtzum? So you're going to have yourself a map with a bunch of levels, but it's a map, and it's not necessarily personal. So therefore, yeah, you can memorize that. We can sum it up like he's doing here, but I'm trying to suggest that if you really want to relate to it, it has to be somewhat personalized. Okay.
That in itself is very quantum because it depends on the perspective of the observer, or in this case, the person's life. I understand your point.
I don't know. I would not use quantum here too much. Quantum I would use in a different context. This I would not call quantum because not what he's discussing. Basically saying relativity, that what's relative depends what level you're at. And there's a concept, you've never heard the concept of microcosm, macrocosm, that in general, a certain level is here, another level is here. When you break it down, the first level has both levels within it, and the lower level has both levels within it. That's really what he's saying here. That's the picture here. Is it, yes, the reason we're talking about spatial ways of understanding space and table, the table is not a chair. No matter what you think, in a quantum state, can they both be? It's not so simple also. Not all quantum theorists say the table and chair on some level are the same. We say it because it fits very well to Chassidus, but not all quantum physicists say that. It's not as black and white as that. But in this world, in this macroscopic world, there's no question, a table's not a chair. Even al pi halacha, you can't make a bracha for Ner Chanukah when you make on Pesach for matzah. A matzah is not a Ner Chanukah. A matzah is not an esrog. Al pi Torah. And Shabbos is not weekdays. And there's real consequences if a person it tries to do weekday on Shabbos. So you can't just go into a place and say, you know what? I'm on a level now that my Shabbos is really a weekday. So therefore I can work. We don't say that. There are real parameters. In halacha, there are real things. You can't cross boundaries. Lahavdil. Ben er lecheshech. Is there a place where they all meet? Yes, in the higher levels, when you do each mitzvah in its parameters, they all connect to the Baal HaRatzon, like we said, Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvayse v'tzivanu. So there's an element that connects them, there's an element that distinguishes between them. Human beings, we are different entities. I'm not talking about selfish necessarily, we just are different entities. Ayin Deyasein Shavas. Different opinions, different faces, different facets. Anyway, let's go back to the Maimer here. Bottom line is we've learned these two levels of Ayin now within Atzilus itself, within Chachma itself, with the Chachma Law and Chachma Tata. That was the last thing we learned. What I'd like to do, if possible, just finish the Maimer now. So he's going to go now back to the questions of this Maimer. It's a Sukkos Maimer. So I'm going to go back to the question.
A question on the Maimer.
Yeah.
The Chachma Law, Chachma Tata, Malchus is Chachma Tata. Are we implying that the quality of Chachma along Tata at every level? Is that like the indication of Das Elyon, Das Tachton, or?
He doesn't go further than this. I said that if you want to break it down, the same logic, you could start saying that in Chachma Tata, you have Chachma Law and Chachma Tata too.
Yeah. It's also always a Chachma kind of scenario.
No. That's what you're asking me? He's using Chachma because Chachma, you can find in Bina these two perspectives too. He's just not discussing it here. In general, Atzilus is Chachma nests in Atzilus, Mekanon of Atzilus. So in general, he's explaining how Chachma, like he said in the beginning of the Maimer, since it's the level of utter bittul in the world of Giluyim, in the world of Sfiris, so he explains how in Chachma you have Dasai and Das Tachten, like we discussed, inner and outer Chachma. Then Chachma Tata is generally Malchus, which is Malchus is the wisdom of the divine as it applies to creation. Chachma Law is the wisdom of the divine as it applies to himself. This is a sugi and Chassidus in general. So generally Chachma Law is a Chachma of Atzilus, and Chachma Tata is as Chachma of Malchus, is Malchus of Atzilus. Does Malchus have Chachma Law too? Bedakus, everything has everything. There's Iskalus. So, but here he's focusing, remember, it's Ein L'Davar Sof. He can't go and start breaking every level into another level. It'll be endless. Obviously, you can extrapolate. But again, if you're talking technical, you're talking finding in your Avodah, the Chachma, the wisdom that God invested in creation, is that godliness or is it creation? So the answer is, it has both elements. He made it very clear that everything has both elements. There's the divine, the dveikus aspect, and then there's the ha'ara that relates to the yesh or to the creation aspect. Like Yehi Oyer, is it God saying Yehi Oyer or is Yehi Oyer focusing on creating light? The answer is both. Depends which dimension and side you're discussing.
I don't want to sound mathematical. I want to put myself at risk, but Bina is Yeshus. Would you say there's a Bina?
Bina is yes l'fiyerech Chachma, not l'fiyerech Midas.
Bina Ra, Bina Tata, is that Ayin Emity?
He doesn't say it. The logic would state that you could find similarities there, but Bina's focus is not so much about the source, but the focus is on understanding something. So generally, Bina would be more a yain of a yesh aniver. But remember, he said all of Atzilus, from Chachma to Malchus. Malchus is even Das Elyon and Malchus and Atzilus, according to the interpretation at the beginning of this Maimer. So Bina would also be, of course, according to that explanation. If you speak about breaking Atzilus down further, so then in Bina, depending, in Inyan, you could say it on Das, you could say it on any level. Das Elyon, Das Tachten, you could say Chesed. It all depends what the focus is on. Is it the focus on the divine dimension, the flow of the divine, or is the focus on the function and the product? In that sense, you could apply it to any level, any level you like, not just Bina. Even in Biyah, you don't think in Bria and Yitzira and Asiya, Bria compared to Yitzira has elements of Das Elyon. We didn't learn it yet, but he may say it, he may not say it, but the logic dictates that.
Right. The question is, when you think about something, what's the direction of the thought? You're looking for the the bittul in that.
Exactly. If you're looking at the bittul, you're focusing on the ayin of the yesh amiti in general. If you're looking at the function and how it relates to the divine source that relates to that function, it all depends. The formula is very clear. One is looking as the divine is the primary and the existence secondary. Yesh amiti and everything else is ayin. The other sees the yesh anivra as primary and the ayin as being the mysterious superimposed entity. It all comes down to, you have to give me a scenario and I'll tell you which is das. You have to look at yourself and find it. I'm not, you want to talk about a scenario, you have to give me the picture and I'll tell you which side is which.
Okay, but in other words,
for most people, what they think is das elyon is really, frankly, das tachten. It's just a higher level of das tachten. Just be aware of that as well.
But functionally, even on the functional level of something, you could find reflected the das elyon.
You could find everything everywhere. Yes, I said. If you want, you could find everything everywhere.
You could use the concept Atzilus Sheba'asiyah also.
Yes, you can. Absolutely. There is Chochmah Vasiyah. Is Atzilus Sheba'asiyah. Well, I just smiled to myself because I would challenge any one of you to tell me the difference between Chochmah Vasiyah, Chochmah Yitzira, Chochmah Bria, Chochmah Atzilus. If you can explain that in a very concrete, rational and logical way, then you'll see what I'm talking about, that it is mathematics. Until you explain that to me or to yourself, you're just talking words. It's just words. How is Chochmah Asiyah different? The Atzilus and Asiyah different than Atzilus and Yitzira, the Atzilus and Bria, and the Atzilus and Atzilus. I know that most of you have not thought about it, but think about it. If you can explain that in a real concrete way, then you'll start seeing what I'm talking about. Das Tachten, das Elyon is very relative. So you have to really be honest with yourself where you're at. We're in the early stages of Das Tachten. Das Elyon now is a concept. That's an abstract concept that most of us are not holding at. Can you imagine it? Yes. But you have to find somewhere where you can relate to it. Like I've said, for most of us, Asiyah Ruchnius is already a big leap, let alone higher levels. Remember, the Alter Rebbe trembled when he said the word Atzilus. Do any of us tremble? No, because it's another planet. And that's that. It's a level. It's a level, it's words. So, remember, what means Ayin of Yesh Amiti? It means you're trembling with God's presence in your life. You know what kind of level that is? Ayin of Yesh Anivre is also a form of trembling on a lower level. You're talking about people who are completely aware of godliness in their life. That's really what it comes down to, the level of your awareness. And in that itself, there's two levels. Now, as I explained, the Rebbe Rashab, in his chesed, in his kindness, is sharing with us these highest levels. But let's be honest with ourselves. Where do you stand when you hear all this? How is this affecting you? Where is this awareness manifest in your life? That's where you start seeing the differences, when you start thinking like that. Like I told you, some people, Yom Kippur, can be a Hasidus, an awakening that is a somewhat, relative to them, a taste. It's not Dafka Atzilus in the full sense of the word. It's that Atzilus within you that was touched a moment where you felt Eined Milvade when you said Shema Yisrael by Ne'ilah with a full heart. But most of the time, we are on a level that's much lower than that. So if you find these type of states of being where you experience that level of divine, that's what this is. These are experiences of the divine in different levels of it. Let me ask you, do you think if you went into the Kodesh Kodashim and the Holy of Holies physically, what do you think would happen to you? Would you even know you were there? Would you even feel that something's happening? Besides the fact that sin would cause people to die there, what would you think you feel if you went to the Beis HaMikdash right now and the Kodesh Kodashim, in a real way, in reality, whether you're Kohen or not? I'm not getting now whether you're allowed to go in, but just an Indian. If you went in, what would happen? Would your consciousness change from what you have on a regular basis now? Would you even appreciate it? Would you know you're there? What would happen? Would it be a magic? You walk into the door and you suddenly, you feel godliness? Think about it in practical terms.
It'd be
When
like
you went to Yechidus, you felt. Doesn't matter who you are and which level you are. When you went to Yechidus, you came out, you felt Begashmias.
Okay, so let me ask you, did it last?
that takes a photo.
Right, exactly. My point is that even if God appeared right now to you, you think you suddenly jump into the Das Elyon zone. Not that simple. Depends where you're at. It's work, And
that drop would help at some point, if you would remember. I mean, these experiences help. But you're
God
right.
bless everybody. I wish everybody had Gilui Elikus all the time. Gilui Elio.
It's the same. It's like going into a minion. You feel when you're with a minion, you're a whole different person because 10 people.
Yecheska, Halavai, we all felt that way.
I think most people do.
Some people go to a meeting, they feel the opposite.
I want to go home and eat. We're all part of that group too. Yeah.
Rabbi Jacobson, could we say, is it accurate to say that unless a person knows Torah, you can't really, how could you even access a little of Das Elyon? You would have to know, that's what Das Elyon is, God's perspective. And the only way to know God's perspective of God's is to know, I think, through his Torah, a little. I'm talking about a little bit, meaning that for vast majority of people that don't know any Torah in this world, of your 8 billion people, 99.99% don't know Torah, they wouldn't be able to access Das Elyon. Is that not correct?
And Das Tachten they could access?
Yes, because there are people that will say, I believe in God because when I look at nature and the world, I can see God in it. I can see a creator.
Well,
yes.
let me tell you this. Because Chochma Bagoyim Tamin, and because all human beings were created B'Tselem Elokim, in the divine image, I have met non-Jewish people and even secular Jewish people who have a certain way of understanding Das Elyon better than many Chassidim do. Because you could extrapolate, you could come to a state of spiritual consciousness and awareness where you realize that the reality is not our existence, and our existence is a novelty. So whether you fully can understand it, obviously, Atar Reisel Adas, that when you have the divine revelation, it's going to be more, you have a lot more information, so to speak, from God's perspective. God's telling us what he's thinking. But there are people who come to Das Elyon, Lefierech. I'm saying everything relative, because from Das Tachten, they come to a Das Elyon state. I've met people like this. I have people I have conversations with on this level. I remember my communication with Leonard Cohen, Olav Shalom, was on this level, where we spoke about these two levels. And he did not learn Chassidus and Torah, but he was smart. He studied spiritual disciplines. And, you could figure out. Now, of course, when the more you learn, and the more you hear what God wants of us, the more you look at all these levels that Rebbe Rashab is telling us. We couldn't guess all this. We couldn't guess every level here. This is clearly someone who is making us privy to secrets that are beyond our regular human logic. My only point is that you could come to these two types of awareness and consciousness. There are those that speak about it as well. As I said, there's speaking and there's being. I am into the being part much more than the speaking part. Speaking is words. I'm not saying we shouldn't have them. We're learning them. The first thing you always begin is teaching and learning ideas, even if you're not there yet. But I keep emphasizing is that it's important to find some place where you are this way, where you experience it in some way, because then it comes alive. Then you can start really having a taste in it. Like many people told me, even people come to who listen to these classes, that until they didn't learn Ayin Beis this type of way, the way we're learning it, all of Chassidus was Das Tachten. Start seeing Das Elyon and Ayin Beis. Some people see it that way. There is a truth to that, because the Rebbe Rashab is exposing so much of what's going on from God's eye and through God's eyes. You start getting a taste from a different reality. But it all comes down to the balance and the journey. And this is where we are all different in a good way. Each of us has to find, like Zusha was crying, not why I'm not like Moshe Rabbeinu, why am I not like Zusha? You have to find your Das Elyon, your Das Tachten within you, and then you talk then you're talking business. Then you're really growing and climbing. So these are the words. These are the, let's call it, this is the infrastructure, what's the word I want to use? The blueprint. This is he's laying out the elements. So now we know what they are. We know the different placements. We started learning about Atzilus is like, So I think it's all about really, another thing is losing control, being vulnerable. Let me tell you what I mean by that. With the tendency, just as the tendency for us physical humans, is to think in terms of defined space and time, structure, determinism, as was mentioned. We also have a tendency to feel, I want to own it. I want to master it. I really believe that to really appreciate Chassidus, you have to surrender to it. You have to you know what? I'm being absorbed now by the Rebbe's words. It's like listening to a higher music. Exactly what we've been talking about. The tendency to want to really fully understand it, which I have as well as you do. We all have that. In a way, undermines our true ability to experience higher levels of divine consciousness, because the I reigns very supreme. I want to understand it. I have to struggle when I teach this, because this is logical material, and I want to place it as well. 2 levels in Atzilus and Biyah, Chochma, Pnimius HaChochma, Chetzenis HaChochma, Pnimius HaTorah, Chetzenis Chochma Elah, Chochma Tata. So yes, there's a logical structure, but the truth is, and maybe that's why I keep emphasizing this, there's a part also that you have to just allow yourself to be carried by this. There are people sat by a Fabrengen, and they didn't even understand or couldn't even hear. But you allow yourself to just be absorbed in the vibe of the experience. And I think that's a big part as well to really get to higher levels. In lower levels, it starts with, okay, here's that, like I said about Bina. Here am I. Now I'm coming to learn something. I'm going to understand it. Now you understand it. Then there comes a point where it's not you and what you're understanding. You allow the understanding to become one with you. And you allow yourself to just be absorbed by it. Like a fish in water, like someone absorbed by music, or any type of experience where you are moving away your need for control and mastery to just be part of it all. And the more you're able to do that, the more I think you come to awareness and consciousness that's called closer to that. I'm not going to call it a full-blown Das Elyon, but relatively speaking, that would be the difference between a form of Das Tachten where I'm here, subject and object, I'm learning this, I'm understanding it, I'm applying it. Rabbi Hillel, going to sleep on Friday. He knows, he learned about it, so then he went ahead and did it, which is a beautiful level. The Alter Rebbe falls asleep. He's not even necessarily even focusing on it. He's not looking at the calendar or the time of the day. It's the time of the time. That's what happens. He's aligned. So these we have to find in ourselves these levels. That's how I would face it. Okay, we ran out of time here about finishing the mimer. So there's always tomorrow.
Another question.
There's always tomorrow.
That we say that Chochma Tata is das Takton, or Ayin Yeshidivro, and Chochma Elah is the Das Elyon, or the Ayin of the Yeshemiti. What does that do for the rest of Atzilus? How do we approach the rest of Atzilus with this in mind?
First of all, he's not discussing it. Secondly, the same principle you could apply everywhere. You asked me this question before with Bina. So why not apply it anywhere? I mean, if Atzilus in general is Das Elyon, if you break down Atzilus itself, it has both. So then in each level, you can also ultimately find both elements. As I said, I gave the formula. If you're talking about the Dveikus Talakus, so even in Bina, there's Chochma Sheba Bina. Just like there's Atzilus Sheba Atzilus, there's Atzilus within Chochma, there's Atzilus within Bina too. There's Atzilus within Chesed, within Gvura. So if you're focusing on that element, it's more the divine aspect, the Dveikus. If you're focusing more on it specific, it would be that. So the same application, but he's not saying it here for obvious reasons. He's not going to go through every level. And in general, Chochma is far more these two elements, because Chochma is a dominant bittul is in it. In the other spheres, bittul is not the prominent feature. It's more their structure, being it compared to Chochma. But he also, why don't you ask, he said, Bina is stimus. He said, stimus of Hanistaris Lashem Elokeinu, he said, was Yutke Chachman Bina. So Bina also has an element of stimus, because it's still a gili only la'atzmei, only to yourself. So in India, you can find it anywhere. I'm not sure what, didn't I say that earlier? I'm not sure what you're asking that beyond what we discussed, but okay.
In other words, we can say that all of Atzilus serves as both as a vehicle and is also a keli for Das Elyon and Das Tachton.
He says it explicitly on the bottom of page 1166. He says it explicitly.
Yeah.
He says Atzilus is the mamutza, and the mamutza has both elements, both madregas, both b'chinas ayin. He says that explicitly. The whole mimer is about that.
Okay. And just as a note, on page 1166, 17 lines from the bottom, it starts talking about in or of Atzilus, both qualities that they're Elyon and Tachton.
Yes.
That's specifically by both of them. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. The way it's Jacobson and the way it's only harder, like the branch of the tree.